Starting.
All right. Well, we're here in Oak Ridge at the home of Marie Armstrong, and we want to get a little bit of her picture of her experience in the world of folk dancing. So, Marie, perhaps you can start and tell me about where you grew up and how you got involved in the world of folk dancing.
Okay, David. Well, I grew up here in North Carolina. This is actually where I live. But during the war, I was stationed with the Air Corps in Leadfield, Fairbanks, Alaska. And one of the sergeants in my office there, now this was in 1944, had been a Cheyenne Mountain dancer. You know what that is. He gave me his own copy of Dr. Lloyd Shaw's book, Cowboy Dances. I kept that book until just recently. I decided that I had to get rid of some things, so I donated it to the archives, the LSF archives in Denver. But while I was there, belonged to the local sourdough club. Now these were mostly Scandinavian dancers because the gold rush was there were a lot of Scandinavians, and I learned the schottische, the Swedish waltz, and would you believe the hambo. But they had heard about a little bit of square dancing, and so I called my first square dance, Red River Valley, to the accompaniment of a honky-tonk piano and a drum and no microphone. Just yelled it out, you know. But I also did a couple of things with the U.S. over there, the same thing. But when I came back to North Carolina several years later, I joined the Greensboro Square Dance Club. Square dance was just the rage then, you had to belong. And I did some calling and some learning, but mostly a few calls. But while I was there, I heard about this institute at Emory University by Fred and Mary Collette. You know, they're from Hills of Habersham. And it was aimed toward teachers. It was called the Folk and Square Dance Institute, because you could get a venue in the college there because of whom you were attracting. Well, I went down, and of course that's where I met Don Armstrong, who was doing the squares and the rounds, and Ralph Page, who was doing some contras, which were a brand new thing to me. Well, you know, 3 months later, Don and I were married and were touring and getting one-night stands, and oh, those one-night stands were so long to drive, and ironing his shirts on the dresser in the motel, because, you know, no such thing as no iron shirts. But at the same time, we were working with the Tampa Recreation Department, and that was probably the only time that I ever had a club of my own. It was called the Squareheads. They were the middle-aged folks who didn't want to go to Don's little bit more rambunctious dances. He had his own band at Danceland, and hundreds of people, I mean, really big crowds of people, and a lot of traveling callers like Ed Gilmore and Ricky Holden and Marvin Schilling. And with the Tampa Recreation Department, we had classes going on, and we became enough known that somebody would call from Louisville, which would call a square dance for us, and somewhere else. And those days were difficult, and at the same time you had to make some money to live on, and we opened a radio station in Newport Richey, Florida. We really built it from the ground up, and it was quite successful. And of course we had to work there part of the time. But after we got known, we went to camps all over, to the main camp with the Hermans and with Ralph Page. And there I learned a lot of the round dances, folk dances, not round dances, but really folk dances. And we met Jane Farwell, and Jane Farwell, in my mind, was the premier folk dance leader. And then we went to camps at Ogilvy Institute, so that Don and I we were lucky. We were lucky. We just had invitations to so many different places. And of course, in 1971, you know that Bob Osgood started the Caller Lab. And now, the first 11 members were mostly from California, and they met at Asilomar, which was the camp for Sets in Order. But then in July of that year, they came to Glenwood Springs in Colorado, and they asked Don to become there and become the 12th member of Caller Lab. Now, Don and our daughter Terry and I were camping in Colorado, and so Don went to Glenwood Springs, but I did not go. And I don't believe that I ever attended any Caller Lab conventions, because at that time, you know, I was doing some work at Peaceful Valley Lodge. Peaceful Valley Lodge was a dude ranch and in Colorado near Estes Park that is one of the, I think, the best ones. Well, I had the privilege of doing the folk dancing and singing and leading horseback rides, but it was just a privilege. For every summer, for 25 years, from 1960 to 1985, I went for part of the summer. Now, Don was off fishing, or he was with the Lloyd Show group doing things, but he would show up on the Saturday night dance. It was a great thing to be, and a lot of people whom I know now said, "Oh, I remember going to Peaceful Valley." It is no longer have dancing. I think they just do horseback riding. But then we met so many people that Bob and Becky Osgood found that if they had 30 participants who wanted to go on a tour, they could get a free ride, you know, everything for the leaders, for the escorts. Well, that's when Don and I just capitalized on what we had done and worked for hard for to get these world trips. We went from, I have the dates here, I'm sorry, until, excuse me, David. Doesn't matter. From 1973 to 1980, sometimes like that. And we went everywhere, you know, all over the world. And square dancing, but mostly entertaining people. And I would choose where we would go, and then I would help with, we took the money for the tipping so that people didn't have to worry about it. It was a real vacation for the people who went on those trips. And we went to places that you would never be able to go without some kind of... David, could we stop for a minute?
Sure. So we're continuing with the interview with Marie Armstrong.
Okay, David, I'm sorry. We took our first overseas trip in 1961, and that was sponsored by the Air Force because they were trying to entertain troops overseas. Well, see, there were many soldiers still stationed in Europe, you know, for years after the war. And we went to England and to Scotland, and each place the Air Force would provide us, if there was a camp close by, with housing, and then we could always go to the PX and fill up on peanut butter and crackers because we took our 13-year-old daughter with us. And the first thing we did, we had planned this ahead, bought a Volkswagen bus, and that's what we traveled in. And then we went to France, and we stayed at one of the Air Force places, and to Spain, and to Morocco, into Belgium. I mean, what a great trip. And Terry was out of school for 9 weeks and came home and told about her trip and stayed on the honor roll. Then after that, all the trips that we made from 1966 to 1979 were sponsored by the Sets and Orders, the Square Dance magazine, because we had met so many people at camps and on our one-night stands that there were 30 people ready to go. And we went to the South Pacific, we went to Russia, we went to Spain, well, that was included in the European trip. We went to South America. There was the least square dancing going on in South America, in Panama, but in really no place else. And we went to the South Pacific. And of course to Australia, New Zealand, where our English, it helped a little bit. And then in 1974, we did Around the World, for 22 days. What a trip. I mean, how lucky Don and I were that square dance was the intro to all these things for us. I'll just never be thankful enough. And but in 1973, Don published his workbook for contra dancers, and after that we became more known. Don became better known for contras than for square dancers. He was never quite the Ed Gilmore of square dancing. Ed Gilmore was we thought were the best. But contra dancing attracted possibly a little different crowd of people, nice, slower music, and people a little bit older could do it. It didn't have the flair, but it had to be the niceness of dancing, the contra dancing. And I've always loved it, and I know that you are like square contra dancing. And so then we went to camps for that. We went to Germany 3 times, and then I went to Germany after Don died, and to 3 different venues, and called contras. I was better at contras than I was at square dancing, and it was just an entry into so many different areas that we wouldn't have ever been able to do on our own. And then, of course, York, in 1969, York, Don Armstrong and Bill Johnston decided to have a Thanksgiving contra dance in the Yorktown Hotel in York, Pennsylvania, and it lasted for 29 years. The last dance was in 2008, and it attracted contra dancers from all over the States and many from Europe. And among the callers were Dick Ledger and Grant Logan and Stu Shacklett and Tony Parks. They always had a square dance caller, along with the contra dance caller. And Grant Logan and Don did the rounds. I did the rounds with them. We did a lot of mixer dances. It was elegant. I mean, in that beautiful hotel on the last night, we all wore long dresses. It was a beautiful time of year. 29 years that the York camp lasted. And it lasted even after Bill Johnston's death and after Don's death. But then after Don's death, I got into doing more children's dances and folk dances that worked for the, seniors usually, and children. And then I went to Germany and to Greece on a couple of camps, that they had, and did contra dancing. And I think now the last few years is the only time in my life that I haven't danced. And part of it is just not quite the opportunity, and part of it is I don't get around as well. I have a little bit of vertigo. But I believe that square dancing, and I want to mention that Jane Farwell and Marianne Herman were just, I thought, the simply the best in folk dancing, and I learned a lot from them, and I tried to pass it on. But the Lloyd Shaw Foundation was most instrumental in spreading folk dances to children, the elementary kid and the secondary kid. And I might have mentioned it before, but I want to repeat it if I did. In my square dance club in Greensboro was a Methodist minister, and through him we got an entrance into the Methodist Publishing House, which had published The World of Fun, of all these wonderful old folk dances, children's dances, with the orchestra, Michael Herman's orchestra. Well, the Lloyd Shaw Foundation in no way could afford to have such an orchestra, so that we went to the Methodist Publishing House and talked to them and told them what we were trying to do. And for a very paltry royalty, very small now, I realize, that we could publish their tunes for the Lloyd Shaw Foundation. And that's where we built up the elementary kit and the secondary kit, and I did all the typing on my little electric typewriter in my house there in Newport Richey, and then we published those books and sold them like mad. And I did several workshops where I sold those kits, and I did one in Grand Cayman. We lived there. We did the biggest one I think I did was in Beaufort County, North Carolina, down on the coast. I did one in Greensboro. But David, I did one in Fairbanks, Alaska. Now you won't believe this. The camp was situated on Lake Harding, the most elementary, the most camp I think we've ever been to. It was just raw in the beginning. It was the same camp at which I had done a Girl Scout retreat in 1946. I thought that was probably a happenstance that would never happen. And it was true though, the same old camp, very, very rustic. And I couldn't believe it, but I was sent there by the Shaw Foundation. But I had done would you believe, a Girl Scout camp in 1946 in the same place, the same old cabins and outdoor privies and stuff. I don't know how. Did I tell you about? I did. I told you about York. I told you about the camps we went to. Ogilvy Camp was a great camp. We went to Maine Camp, of course, with the Hermans and Ralph Page, and to camps. We had our own camps in Canada, and camps just all over every year to the Lloyd Shaw camps, wherever it was located. I mean, the Lloyd Shaw Foundation became our basis for doing all these things. And I'm grateful, and I'm a life member, and I get the magazine every month, and I read every word of it. But square dancing, folk dancing, and contra dancing has given me a life of experience that you cannot equal anywhere in the world. I love it. I believe that it's made me what I am today, a fairly content woman at 93.
Those very wonderful stories. And I want to come back for just a moment. Actually, at the very beginning, where did you start with your folk dancing? Where did you start folk dancing?
From what I learned at Emory University, I think, I don't recall that I had done any folk dancing ahead of that time, you know. And then when we went to a camp at Ogilvy, well, when I went to main camp, and in the next couple of years, with having met Ralph Page, that was another good way to get into places, you know. So he would have Marianda ask Don to come there. Who is Don Armstrong? Well, he said, you just wait and see. And so I learned folk dancing there. And folk dancing per se, I did more children's dancing. Of course, in Europe, I had my very first folk dancing in Alaska with these Scandinavian people. And when I met Michael Herman and he found out that I could do the humbo, he was completely surprised. I said, well, I learned it in Alaska. Why? He said, nobody. I said, well, the Sourdough Club in Alaska they did lots of Swedish dances, you know, and the Scottish, I don't know, I always thought it was Scotland, but I don't know, the Scottish is pretty universal, you know, just different things of the Scottish. But probably there, and a little bit in the USO, and you know, in everything, all the camps that we did, we had some kind of folk dancing. First we called it round dancing. Well, the round dancing, you know, this partner, you do these beautiful things. Manning and Nita Smith and Frank and Carolyn Hamilton were the exponents of round dancing. And Don and I did quite well. I was a pretty good partner, but folk dancing, I think more of European dances and some old dances. I had one little dance that an older lady gave me in Florida that she said she had danced at their house, you know, and it was called Walking on the Green Grass. We never had it recorded. Dorothy Shaw wanted to have it recorded, but we never had it recorded. It was Walking on the Green Grass, slow, slow, slow. You've probably never done it, but it goes back 100 years, easily 100 years. And also, one thing that I gave the foundation, for which I'm pleased, and which I got from Ralph Page, was a Latin round, Paul Bersum Ego, which has been used in the Shaw Foundation until this day, and is Paul Bersum Ego, nihil habeo, cum meum dago. And it means I am poor, I have nothing. I give you my heart. And when it's done in 3 parts, it sounds like an anthem. It's absolutely beautiful. It is still done by the Shaw Foundation.
It's a wonderful gift. Now, again, I'm returning to some of the roots. What type of square dancing did you start with? Traditional squares, modern squares?
Modern squares, you would call it. I think in my teenage years, I went to a couple of what we call big circle dances. You know, just, you know what a big circle is. You know, you do a figure like Birdie in the Cage, and then you have the lady and move on to the next. And those big circle dances are still done today in Asheville, but the modern dance that followed, you know, we did, Don wrote so many dances, so many square dances, and most of them were round dances. You know, we found the tunes, the popular tunes, and I called squares. I did very little patter calling. I was not really a great square dance caller. I was probably a better promoter and doing all the other things than a good round dance partner. But Don put out so many books, and I did all. Now this was what I had a little you know, not even an electric typewriter, and then we ran off the copies, you know, one of those
Mimeograph machine.
mimeograph machine. Oh God! We made 3 or 4 of books of Don's square dance calls, and we'd get $1 for them. David, I've had a very, very varied life, as you can see.
Yeah. So I'm curious again. You said that your first call was a square up in Alaska. How did you manage to get drawn into the calling?
Well, in the group, in the Sourdough Dance Club, somebody else did it ahead of me. I wasn't the first one, you know. But I think possibly some soldier, you know, somebody from the States, I don't know. But they were doing a little bit of square dancing, a little bit of just what they had learned from someone else or heard about, or they didn't even have a record. They just knew what it was. They knew the tune, and I called it without any machine, just the piano and the drum. No microphone. Red River Valley was our very first one. But that was, it got there through people coming in from the States during the war, I'm sure.
So how did you go from calling Red River Valley to doing more calling and more leading?
Well, when I came back to North Carolina, I stayed in Alaska 7 years. When I came back, I joined, you know, the Greensboro Dance Club, and there they had records and more dances, and I learned them and called them, and we had a dance every week, and then I found out that I really wanted to learn more about it. That's the reason I went down to the Emory Institute in order to. I had no idea who the leaders would be except the Colettes, and I'm there.
So who do you think influenced you in your leadership style?
Well, you mean after Don? Of course Don, but in leadership, maybe, I don't know. I don't know who else. Maybe the Hermans.
Did you try and pattern yourself after someone, or?
As to the calling, no. I just did what Don told me to do. I just called what Don told me to call.
So I guess since we're on Don, what part do you think you played in making Don the success that he was?
Well, I was a good organizer, and I kept the dates going, and I kept his shirts ironed, and I kept our little business at home going, and so we could do it. And I was a fair dance partner, a pretty good dance partner, but I sought venues, you know, where we could go, the camps where we could go and get in touch with them, and just behind him. That's all.
You mentioned about the big orchestra you called to Red River Valley, and then the recorded music. How do you feel about live music versus recorded music?
It took a long time for me to learn to dance to live music, as I think you may know. You know, your records, you can memorize it, you know exactly when it's going to start, but then I enjoy calling with live music. I think it's just adds to my feeling, and I know it adds to the dancers. I am not proficient at that, but it can do it.
Well, one thing that Don was known for was his belief in doing a very brief walkthrough? More dancing than teaching.
Than teaching. Well, that is absolutely true. He was so concise in his explanation, of exactly how this goes, and you could almost dance it immediately from his instructions. He was very, very good at that. A master of it. He really was. Even overseas, when we were teaching a dance to people who did not even know the language, folk dancing and square dancing has its own vocabulary. You see, we called dances in Japan. We never made any attempt to change anything to English where we were, because square dancing and folk dancing, and now even contra dancing, has its own vocabulary. So wherever you are, you use your best English and your best approach to it. And we in teaching the little folk dances or the circle dances, you just get out and put your foot there and put your foot there and showing your hands, and you were away. We never had any problem that way. We really never did. I didn't know any other. I knew French, but we didn't do much square dancing in France. I later, in late life, I learned Spanish, but I never had the opportunity or the necessity to use Spanish in the folk dancing. The Spanish folk dancing is a little different from ours. Very good, but not something I do well.
I was curious what the social life was like in the dances back when you were young.
The social life? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, in the first place, absolutely no drinking. You didn't. You'd fall flat on your face. But it became a thing, clothing became a thing, I never did wear the big bouffant skirts. It just didn't become me. But I really liked the prairie length dresses, that the ones that you've seen Enid wear so often. That's the kind, and I did have beautiful blouses from Mexico. Don and I went into Mexico with the purpose of, because Marianne Herman had sold us some of those lovely embroidered blouses, with the little puff sleeve, that are just universally considered square, folk dance or square dance. And so we went down, and of course we went down, David, to bring them home to sell, and did. Never had enough of them to sell. But I had those beautiful cotton that was the very best. They were never passed with something else. And so clothing became sort of a thing. And then most of the time we done some kind of refreshments on the holidays. I would do something special, and have something. But you were really the nicest people. Square dancing and folk dancing and contra dancing, you just met the cream of the crop. And I still have I am outliving all these wonderful people, David. Makes me feel so bereft, of that company, because all these people who went with us on the trips, I've outlived them all. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get maudlin about it.
So when you were young, were it mostly changing partners, or did people generally dance with the same person through the night?
Oh, in our early dances, it was all partners changing and squares changing. Nobody made up squares in the early dances, And later on, it became, that's when I think square dancing dropped to its lowest ebb. It's when you had to have your own square, and you didn't dance with anyone else, and you just, it was no longer quite as social. It was a game. And we were against that. We thought we should be social and we should choose partners and get where somebody needed it. We needed a couple with a square. That became taboo.
What things would you like to see happen in the world of folk and square dancing?
Well, not having been in it, for the last 12, 15 years, I'm glad to see that the foundation is still alive and well, because it represents so much of the dance world to me, and it has had its low moments, but I think that it is now refreshed and still going strong. Bill Richmond will always be there, Leland Kopp will always be there, and Lloyd Shaw's legacy will always be there. Everybody, and it's true, gives Lloyd Shaw the role of the founder of the modern square dance. And if you read the Car Lab notes, you will find that they believe that, Bob Osgood, as well as Don and everyone who met them. Now, certainly the Hermans were the leaders of the folk dance movement, years even before the square dance movement. And I really am not in the world enough now, David, to know how it's going. I know that you're doing contra dancing, and there's quite a bit of contra dancing in North Carolina. There is still a lot of contra dancing and square dancing in Europe. It is just alive and well, especially in Germany and Belgium and Switzerland. I was there 2 years ago, and clubs all over.
So, what was it like traveling to Europe to teach?
Well, I just felt we were so fortunate. We were so privileged to have been chosen, and then usually, most of the time, not every time, was there any one person whom we knew there, but most of the time there had been some couple or person who had heard about us, and it was just great. I don't know how to express it. We felt privileged to be an emissary from the United States and an emissary of square dancing. Now, when we went to China, we were not sent as a square dance group because that was not.
Okay, we're finishing up interview with Marie Armstrong. Is there anything that you would have liked to have done that you haven't done?
I don't think so. Don asked me he was a pilot, if I wanted to learn to fly. And after a few rides, I said no. So I didn't want to fly. I really cannot think of anything more than what I have done. I have had such a rich life, and a great part of that richness has come from meeting the people in the movement of folk and contra and square dance that I never would have met otherwise. So I just say that I'm rich. I'm very grateful for this experience.
Is there anything else that you would like to add? Anything else that you'd like to tell us?
I am now unable to really dance because of vertigo. If I had one more wish, I would like to be able, even at my age, to go to the contra dances and enjoy the people, enjoy the music, enjoy the calling. I regret that age has taken that toll. I have so many other good things. I cannot say that, life is still good to me, but that is, I would like to be able to dance again.
Well, I very much thank you for your time and your insights and your memories. And we'll get this packaged up, and I hope this will be good for those who have a chance to see it. I personally am glad that I met you, and I'm sorry that I did not have a chance to meet you when you were a leader. I would have loved to have seen you and danced to you when I was younger, but again, I'm thrilled to have had the chance to
Thank you.
meet you and a
Thank
chance to
you.
do this interview.